We live in a haunted house. It is really not bad once you get used to it. In fact, at times, when there's no activity, you can actually get a little lonesome for them. We moved here in 1982. It wasn't long after we settled into our new house that we bumped into the former owner at the local church. She asked us if we had seen the ghost. We didn't know what she was talking about. She said it sometimes appears in the front bedroom, our daughter's room, as a shadowy figure of a woman in a rocking chair. Our daughter overheard us talking about it and she said, "Oh, that must be the lady who sits in the chair at my desk at night. She doesn't bother me, just sits there kind of watching after me." We had noticed some strange things in the house, but put them off to natural causes such as the reoccurring footsteps in the hardwood floors after we went to bed, the strange way the television would turn on and off by itself, other electric appliances doing funny things, and objects disappearing then turning up somewhere else, but we dismissed the idea of it being ghosts until one late night. My wife woke up thirsty in the middle of the night, so she went to the kitchen to get a drink. When she got to the living room, she saw someone in the shadows in the middle of the room. Thinking one of the kids had gotten out of bed, she hollered, "Get your butt back in bed." The figure streaked off and disappeared. It didn't go around the sofa, it went through the sofa. It didn't walk, it glided. It was the figure of a woman with long black hair. The kids were sound asleep in their beds. My wife came back to bed without her water. My first experience with her was about 10 p.m. one night. I was walking home from next door, and as I approached the driveway, I saw a figure of a woman walking in the drive. She was cutting across the edge of the lawn on the north side of my shop about 20 feet away. The light on the north side of the shop was on, illuminating her faintly. I could make out no details of her, only a dark figure of a slender woman walking briskly towards our house from the west. As I got in range of the motion detector light on the east side of my workshop, it came on. The figure vanished. This phantom female I saw matched the description of the dark woman other family members have seen in our house. But the dark woman is not the only spirit in our home. We have discovered there are others. Some are shy and reclusive. Some are a little mischievous and playful. They like to play with stuff, just to let you know they are there, I think. They hide things. You put something down and a minute later it is gone. You search all over and then find it right back where you laid it in the first place. They turn things on and off. TVs, radios, just about anything, even water faucets. One morning, my son went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. Dad, come here." I went into the kitchen to see what was wrong. "What's this all about?" my son asked. He was standing back from the sink, pointing to the faucet which was running full blast. My wife was standing beside him. "The knob is turned off, but it's still running," he said. We stood and watched it for a minute. Figuring a faulty valve, I started to walk towards the sink to try to turn it off by myself, and suddenly, it just stopped. Turned off all by itself. I looked it over, turned it on, and then turned it back off again. It worked fine. I checked the valves the next day, and everything was functioning properly and has worked fine since. TVs are a real favorite. I was waking up from a nap one evening when I heard the television on in the living room. I assumed my son was home and was watching a movie. As I arose, I heard the television turn off. When I went into the living room, the lights were off, the television was off, the door was still locked, and my son was not there. My wife and I were the only people in the house, and she was still sleeping. I turned on the television, and the same movie I had heard from the bedroom was playing. Radios are popular with them too. On another occasion with my wife, my daughter and I were watching television in the living room. All of a sudden, the CD player comes on and starts playing a CD at high volume. My wife got up and turned it off. Reaction from all of us was very casual. "Go to grandma's if you want to listen to music. We are watching TV," I jokingly said out loud. At the time, my mother was living in a mobile home behind the property. My sister was staying with her. I found out the next day they took my suggestion to heart. My sister called. "I went out to go to work," she said. "The radio in the van was playing. I thought someone left it on. Oh great, now the battery will be dead," I thought. Then I realized the radio doesn't work unless the key is on. I was holding the key in my hand. That's weird, I thought. I unlocked the door and I reached in to turn off the radio and it was already off. It quit playing when I touched it, so I put the keys in the ignition and turned on the radio and it came on. I turned off the ignition and it went off Ignition on, radio on. Ignition off, radio off. Does not work without a key. How is it playing without the key and the ignition and the knob turned off? She asked. We have all gotten used to our ghosts now. Our children have grown up around them and have their own stories. Their friends and ours have all been scared out of their wits a time or two, but are accustomed to it now. New friends take a little time to get acclimated though. My son was in his teenage years and most of his friends knew about our house. His new friend Jason did not though. My wife and I had gone out for the evening and my son was having a party. All his friends were over. Everyone was having a good time but Jason. He was tired. Jason was new to Tommy's parties. Jason was also new to our house. If he had known about the things that happened here, he might have not left the main group and gone to the game room where it was quiet. Most of our friends know and have experienced eerie things while here with enough frequency that it really doesn't surprise them. But Jason was new, ripe picklings from a mischievous ghost. So Jason left the party and went into the game room by himself, where he laid on the floor to get a little rest. My son and his friends were only a little surprised to see Jason run into the living room pale and frightened. The pinball machine, Jason said. Flash Gordon, it came on all by itself and started playing itself. There's nobody in there, and it just came on and started playing. Yeah, so? Responded my son's other friend, who was so accustomed to such things here. Flash was Philip's favorite machine, my son explained casually. Philip was our nephew who died in an accident a short time before. He was probably just enjoying a round of pinball, said my son. He is a nice guy. He won't bother you. Everyone went on about having fun, except for Jason. He stuck close to the group for the rest of the night, but he never came back to our house. There have been times when these spirits have saved the day for us. We once awoke to find a fire had started on our patio by a candle left burning when we went to bed. About 15 square feet of one wall covered in rattan was charred from the flames, but somehow, mysteriously, it had gone out by itself. The dry rattan, though very flammable, had just stopped burning. This was not the only time. It had only been a couple of weeks since we buried my wife's brother, Virgil. Tragically, he was killed by a car while walking home. My wife had been cleaning out his mobile home next door. A terrible task, but she faced it with courage and fortitude. Sometimes I think she is operating on automatic pilot. She came home and told me, I saw him, Virgil. He was just standing there in the doorway of his trailer while I was sorting out his things. He said nothing. Then he disappeared. A few days after that, my dad came into the shop where I was working. Do you know the door on Virgil's mobile home is open? He asked. No, I replied. I'll check it out. The home was vacant since Virgil died. We were watching his property while probate proceeded. I walked over and saw the front door ajar. I feared the worst, that the vacant home had been broken into. We were careful to lock the door, and no one else had a key. I carefully entered the premises. The overwhelming odor was unmistakable. Propane, strong. I had to exit immediately. A gas leak. The house was full of it. I went to the rear of the home and found the main gas valve. I turned it off. Covering my mouth, I entered the home again. Quickly, I began opening windows. I could not stay in there for very long. I can't believe this place didn't blow up, I said to myself. It's a good thing the front door was open, but how did the front door get open anyway? Sometimes they go with us, sort of a spirit field trip, I suppose. In 1998, my wife and I took on extra jobs. I was managing and bartending at a local hotel bar, and my wife was the cocktail waitress. I guess they got lonesome for us. No one at home to pester and all, maybe just bored. So they started going to work with us. We were at the lounge. It started out small, TV on, TV off, glasses doing funny stuff, that sort of thing. We had closed for the night. It was clean up time. I was walking to the kitchen when I heard a noise from the juice box. The pages of cards, which show the selections, were flipping on their own. Page after page flipped, all in one direction, then it would switch and go back the other direction. This was just the start. They seemed to prefer after hours at the bar. We were cleaning up one night when we decided the small table and chairs would look better if I moved them farther away from the pool table. I moved them over near the dance floor. I proceeded to clean the rest of the bar. When I turned around, the table and chairs we moved are back in their original positions by the pool table. The next night we decided to mess with them. After closing, we rearranged the entire setup in the bar. Tables, chairs, everything. Then we went to my office, got our stuff together to go home, and walked out to find everything back where it was originally. What had taken us a couple of hours to do, they had accomplished in a few minutes. We have lived here in the magic spot about 25 years now. I have notebooks full of activity, notes about ghostly occurrences, sightings, etc. We've never tried photography, but being an artist, I've done paintings of some of the entities we have here. We also experience really odd weather patterns, most often in the winter. Radios and televisions, actually just about any electronic device, is likely to act up when used here, and we have learned more about the history of this area. A local Native American medicine man once told me this place gives them the willies. Teenagers refer to this place and the surrounding area as the magic spot and have many stories about it. Over the years, we have actually had a good relationship with our ghosts, though at times mischievous. For the most part, they just go about their own business and we do the same. We do at times bump into each other, however. Sometimes it is much surprise to them as it is to us. Sometimes it is nice to have them around. Other times it can be quite frightening. I was actually surprised one late night, and it and I streaked off in opposite directions. I don't know which of us was more surprised. They have become as much a part of our home as our family members. It wouldn't be the same without them. As the youngest of 5 children, all boys, and the son of the 7th daughter, of the 7th daughter, of the 7th daughter, supernatural followers will know that means a white witch. I've seen many strange things. I and my brothers grew up in what would be described as a haunted house. At a very young age, I loved to play in my parents' bedroom, which overlooked the landing, first 2 steps, and small landing at the top of the stairs. On an almost daily basis, I saw shadows walking along the landing. They were not ordinary shadows. These were floating. They were not cast on the wall, but were in midair, but I could see through them. As I got older, they seemed to happen less frequently. I still see these shadows occasionally, out of the corner of my eye. In the early 80s, my brothers discovered the Ouija board method of entertainment, which heralded some very interesting results. On one such session on the Ouija board, the spirit known to us as Paraga put us in touch with a chap called Ray with a message for my father. I can't remember the surname that we were given, but we passed the message on to my father, who accused us of conspiring with my mother to try to persuade him that Ouija board works. Of course, this was simply not the case. It turned out that his friend Ray had committed suicide while my eldest brother was very young. Therefore, it would be impossible for us to know anything about it unless we were told by someone. We simply had no knowledge prior to the session of events that had taken place so many years before. On another occasion when I was 11 or 12, we had a very strange encounter. My mother and father were out for the evening, and my brothers were left to look after me. The session took place in the dining room, which had one exit into the kitchen. From the kitchen, you could exit to the hall towards the front door, or a door latch with one bolt lock to the back garden and side entrance to the property. There was a window looking into the garden that the strange phenomena took place in. It was a strange session that seemed to pick up an angry persona. All of a sudden, there was a bluish glowing light out the back of the house, and the window started to shake violently. As we made a mad dash for the kitchen, the door to the back garden also started to shake violently. We all ran for our lives out the front door and scattered in all directions up and down the road. There was snow on the ground, and I was dressed in PJs and no shoes. It was almost half an hour and much deliberation before we returned to the house and went in. There were no signs of any strange happenings. We used playing cards with letters drawn on the back and yes and no written on separate cards and numbers in the middle of the table in a row, and some excellent shaped wine glasses that were virtually impossible to push. In an early experiment, the glass zoomed round and round with great speed. All of a sudden, it left the table lifting up to the top corner of the room and smashing into small pieces. Even the stem and base broke into pieces, the biggest the size of your little fingernail. Anyone who has ever broken a wine glass will know it takes a tremendous force to break the stem and base to that extent. In 1985, at the age of 15, I was walking home to the family home around 10 p.m. from a friend's house. It was a wet and windy night, and I walked with the collar up on my coat with my chin tucked into the top of my zip, only looking up every now and then to see where I was going. There is a small village in the outskirts of the city, just down the road from the family home. I was walking towards the village, where I would have to turn right to go in the right direction to get home. Approximately 1,000 yards before the road I was walking along came to an end, There's a 10-story block of flats, and next to that, a retirement home. As you get nearer to the end of the road, approximately 500 yards from the end, there was a row of tenant bungalow flats going along the road I was approaching and intending to turn right towards home. To the left was a large grass area between them and the main road. I passed the end bungalow flat, heading to the T-junction with the grass area to my left and approximately 100 yards of space all around me to the nearest object, some small bushes. All of a sudden, I saw a pair of brown shoes come into view a couple of steps in front of me. Startled, I looked up to see an elderly gentleman in front of me. I took a step sideways and went around him. Something struck me as strange, and after a few more steps, I turned around to see nobody behind me. There was absolutely no way that the old man walking slowly with a walking stick could possibly have moved quick enough to get behind something to obscure him from my view in such a short time. In fact, the distance between me and the nearest object was too great for Ben Johnson at his prime to reach before I turned around. It wasn't until I thought about it while walking home that it struck me what it was that was so strange about the gentleman when I first laid eyes on him. Despite being quite persistent, rain and strong wind driving the rain, the man was dry and there were no drops hitting him. He was all dressed in brown shoes, suit, and flat cap. I can't remember the color of his shirt or if he was wearing a tie, but I will never forget his face as he smiled a gentle smile of thanks as he moved out of his way. His features were very clear. I've never seen him since. This village was quite a friendly community where most people knew everyone else, but I did not recognize this gentleman. There were many strange things that happened in the family home, from power cuts that were localized to just our house and the whole street. We had electricity meters that took coins to pay for the electricity supply. If the electricity went out, it should need to be topped up by popping a coin in the slot. Even after putting money in the meter, the electricity would not work. It would be found to have been switched off, and in those days, there were no such things as circuit breakers that would trip the switch. When my father knocked out the dining room window to put in a patio door, we found 3 patio negatives of an old gypsy man. The first of him, out the front of his caravan. Another of him stood on the caravan steps, and the last of him laid out dead. We intended to have them developed. They were missing from the place we put them. We assumed they fell down behind the kitchen cabinet where they were left. When the kitchen was remodeled, there was no signs of them, and other things we assumed had fallen down behind the cabinets. On many occasions, I've told certain people to answer the phone because it was for them, and it was. The problem was the phone had not actually rung until after I had told them, but within a few seconds. I can't explain it, but it still happens. It was in October of 2004, around 3:30 in the morning. I was slowly waking and was in the state where I could hear the TV, but wasn't quite awake. I remember having this eerie, scared feeling, and in my sleep started singing Jesus Loves Me, the old childhood Sunday school song. Anyways, I remember feeling a presence in my legs, real heavy, and I felt something was watching me. I snapped awake and moved, and the thing made a swooshing noise, and my cat even looked up in the air where this went over my head and out the door. I was on the couch and the front door was behind me. My cat was acting funny even before this, and at times, I would come home and feel a nervous, scared feeling like someone was in the house. That's when I saw it. It was the silhouette of the Hat Man. I looked petrified, and I couldn't just shake the feeling. It was almost inside my head, like it was screaming voices at me. The voices released from the Hat Man into my head were all mumbled, so I couldn't really understand any of them. A split second later, there is silence, and the Hat Man slowly fades into the abyss, actually fading into the TV screen, once and for all. I don't know if this has anything to do with the paranormal, or if I'm just losing my mind. Was it sleep paralysis? Was the Hat Man real? Or was it just all in my imagination? I have no idea, but I'm kind of hoping and praying to God and Jesus that this doesn't even exist, and that I'm all hallucinating this just to make myself feel better. As I previously stated, my cat has even noticed weird things that have occurred in this house, and I'm just not sure what to trust anymore. Are my senses going crazy? Am I just in touch with the paranormal? Am I opening up another portal to the paranormal dimension in which beings and spirits, including the Hat Man, come to greet me with demonic images and voices in my head? I don't know, but I'm just hoping that I will never find out the true answer to this mystery. Thank you so much for reading. I know it's short, but thank you. In my life, my family and I had numerous paranormal incidents. There were always heavy footsteps, sounding like a person in boots upstairs in the attic. Sometimes I heard them coming down the stairs or on the front porch at night, but oftentimes I had trouble keeping them. They said the TV kept going off and on. One said she saw a man in the attic through the window. My boys were afraid to sleep in their room alone sometimes because they saw people in the backyard. There were two very strange occurrences that happened in the winter of 1991. I was married at the time to a man who was abusive to my children and myself when he drank. One night, I smelled something burning in the bedroom, and the bed was smoldering. I woke up my husband, and he pulled the mattress off the bed. There was a burning area right in the bottom of the top mattress. He had not been smoking in bed, and wouldn't have been there anyway. Another night, I took the kids to get ice cream. When I got back, the doors were all deadbolted and windows locked to where I couldn't get in. I looked through a crack in a curtain and saw my husband lying unconscious on the floor, and the heavy dining room table was turned over. The phone was dangling from the wall. I pried open a window and climbed in. I called for an ambulance and called the police. My husband was taken to the hospital, and the police detective was totally baffled. Later, my husband said that he was talking on the phone to his mother when he was hit hard from behind and knocked out. His mother called to check in on what had happened, saying they had been talking, she heard noises, and he was no longer there. I felt like maybe we had a ghost that was protective towards us, but angry with my husband for his actions. I usually felt safe in the house, but on occasions, I was very frightened. After my husband and I divorced, I felt the need to move. While checking out the history of the house later, I found that it was originally owned by a doctor who kept his ill patients in his home with him. This was in the early 1900s, around 1907. After he left, there was a terrible train wreck just outside of town where some Mexican immigrants and a couple of local workers were killed in a train collision. Their bodies were badly burned and thrown into a massive grave, which turned out to be in the back acre of our yard. I feel certain that we had multiple spirits, though before this time, I never believed in ghosts. I was visiting California on a school trip. My friends and I were hanging out in the hotel's hot tub. We were playing Truth or Dare. I was dared to leave the hot tub and dive into the cold pool, then run back to the hot tub. I got out and went to the edge of the pool. Looking at the clear water, I dove in. Next thing I knew, I was face to face with a dead body. He was face down at the bottom of the pool. It was like it was slow motion. He turned to me with his eyes closed. He slowly opened his eyes and stared into my eyes. He was missing his left eye. I was scared. I breathed in to scream and breathed in water. I pushed through the dead man on accident, and in my struggle to get to the top, I was thrashing around quite a bit. A friend came and helped me out. Panting, I said I didn't feel like playing anymore. Me and my two friends went back to our hotel room. One friend was taking a shower, and my other friend was watching TV. We noticed their phone blinking. We checked the messages. We had 362 messages. We were only out for an hour. We had no way to trace the calls. No one even knew our hotel phone number. We listened to the first few messages. They seemed like they were all blank. Finally, we heard something. One word, hell. This freaked me out. I haven't told about the man at the bottom of the pool. I tried to downplay the message. Later that night, we went to sleep. I don't recall any of this next part, but my friend said that at 3 a.m. I got up, turned on the curling iron, and turned on the faucet. I then hit my head really hard on the headboard of the bed and went back to sleep. I woke up that morning with nothing but an eerie feeling, which was soon forgotten since the next day we went to Disneyland. A week later, we drove home. The thought of this man still terrified me. I just pushed it to the back of my mind and continued on. I did not believe he wanted to harm or scare me, though. Weeks went by. I remember doing chores around the house. I was putting laundry away in my mother's room. Her dresser has a huge mirror. After placing the clothes in the drawer, I looked up into the mirror. Standing behind me in the back of the room was this man. I could see him very clearly. He was young, long blondish hair. His skin was grayed and almost green, waterlogged, and a little wet looking. His good eye was brown, and where his other eye should have been was just a hole, It seemed to go on forever. It was almost hypnotizing. I noticed this all in an instant, because when I turned around, this young man turned and walked away. I sensed that his name was William. I didn't see William for a very long time, although I felt him following me. Our house began to change. Radios would turn on when they weren't even plugged in. A music box would start to play randomly. Shelves would fall off the wall. Everyone noticed it. Everyone was afraid. I wasn't. Years went by. I started to feel a difference over me. At night, I would wake up to voices in my room, like a crowded room where you could hear only a few words that made sense. I tried to ignore the voices. Sometimes, I would wake up with a single voice in my ear talking to me. They seemed to never make sense. It was like the end of a sentence or the beginning. I remember waking up one night. I felt scared for the rest of the time. It was very late at night. I knew no one was awake. A blue light was outside my closed door. My door began to shake very violently, but the beads on my door didn't even sway. I kept all of this to myself. Who wanted to tell their friends and family they heard voices in their head and see people in swimming pools? I don't think so. Later that year, I moved out and started going to college. My family said that since I left, the strange happenings seemed to have moved out when I did. Strangely, my roommate said that since I moved in, strange things started happening. Pictures falling off the walls, TVs turning on, shadows, and the feeling of being watched. I still heard voices at night, but never anything scary. I learned to live with it all. Now, in 2009, I'm married. I still hear voices at night, but they're making more sense now. Sometimes the voices say things to me like, "Get out, I'm not kidding, get out," and laughing followed. Evil laughing. I tried to go back to sleep. One night, a few weeks ago, I woke up feeling like someone was in the room with me, a different energy than my husband's. I looked up and saw a dark figure standing over me. My dog started barking and growling like crazy. The dark figure turned his head and walked out the closed door. I went back to sleep and woke up to a voice telling me, "Your destiny will be at the Valley of Thunder, then all the voices shall be heard." I haven't ignored that one. Sometimes, I will go to Yosemite National Park, Valley of Thunder, and see what my destiny is. It just doesn't seem right yet. 2 nights ago, I had a dream. William came to me. He didn't say anything, but I sensed he was telling me it was okay, not to be afraid of him. I feel as if since I've met William, I've become sensitive to spirits and energies. I've met other spirits beside William. I feel as if now I have the ability to read energies and sense thoughts. I almost regard William as a friend. As an avid EVP researcher and long-haul truck driver, I've had many opportunities to get EVP recordings from all over the country. My research has revealed some startling results lately. On the 20th of January this year, an EVP has attached itself to me somehow. Now, no matter where I am or where I go, this EVP named Desmond Heathers is in every recording I make on my Olympus digital voice recorder. Even when I'm traveling down the road at 65 miles per hour, Desmond is there ready to talk when I turn on my recorder. I know a lot about them and where he is now. One startling development occurred when I asked Desmond if he knew anyone that I knew. He said, "Yes, Joe." I said, "Joe, my brother?" He said, "No, Joe who is with me." I asked him if Joe was with us now, and he said, "He is in you now." So I asked, "Joe, are you there?" And I got this voice in the recording that was very deep and gruff sounding. I can only say it sounded like Mr. T from the TV show The A-Team. Joe said, "Go away, leave me alone." Well, I don't communicate with those who don't want to, so I just do what I always do with the ones I get who I don't think deserve my attention. I just ignore them. Here's where the story takes a strange turn. The week after that, I was talking to my doctor about a fatigue problem I've been having lately. Nothing serious, just tired during the times of the day I don't think I should be. He asked if I was sleeping okay, and I said I tend to wake up several times during the night. He recommended I get a sleep study done. After finding the only sleep research center within 100 miles of where I live, I was told the study would cost in excess of $1,600 for one night. Well, I thought this was ridiculous, so I figured I would do it myself. I was on the road the night I decided to do my sleep study, and set up my digital voice recorder and DV camera on the sleeper of my big rig. I fell asleep within 15 minutes. When I reviewed the recordings the next morning, I was so startled at what I had recorded, I could hardly listen to it. The recording revealed that I snore rather loudly. What was startling, though, was that EVP Joe was using my snoring sound to speak to me in my sleep. With every rattling snore, he formed words. He said things like, "Don't you know you love me? Don't leave me. Don't wake up. I'm not done yet. Don't you remember me from the Navy? You know you're listening to me. You know you love me. How did I get in here? What happened to me? I need you. I'm just jealous of you, Tony. Tony, please, help me." Not just that night either. Every night I've recorded, he's talking to me in my sleep. It concerns me because I don't know if there may be some subliminal influence with him talking in my sleep like that every night. I think I know him. I vaguely recall a friend I had in the Navy named Joe back in 1980. I remember feeling sorry for the guy because of his drinking problem and was always trying to help him when he got in trouble. I used to buy him gifts for his birthday and Christmas because his family wanted nothing to do with him. Other than that, I can't recall very much about him. When I asked him how long he has known Desmond, he said about 5 years. That's how long Desmond told me he's been dead. Actually, Desmond didn't even know he was dead until I convinced him he was. He kept trying to tell me he was alive. So I asked what it looked like where he was, and what did he see around him. He said nothing but a faint amber and turquoise colored light that was all around him. He desperately wants out of there. He says he can see me sometimes. One day, when I was sitting at my office desk at home, I asked him if he could see me, and he said he could. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill and asked if he could see what I had in my hand. He said $1. Thinking it was just a lucky guess on his part, I dropped the bill and picked up a Bic lighter. I then asked again, "What am I holding in my hand right now?" And he said, "A light." I reached in my desk for it and had my hand closed around it so I couldn't even see it. How did he know? Many times Desmond will ask if I can see him. I've never been able to do so, so I got out my digital camera and asked if he would let me take pictures of him. He said, "I will try." I told him where to be in my living room at home while I snapped a few dozen pictures. Nothing showed up on review, so I asked if he would mind trying something else. I explained what white noise was to him, and he was already familiar with it. He helps me to adjust the levels and spectrums of white noise to be able to hear him better. I explained that I could generate a different type of noise that is not audible, but that I might be able to see him with. So I set up my DV camera to form a video feedback loop with my Sony Trinton 32-inch TV, manually adjusting the focus in such a way that the feedback picture was focused on the pixels on the screen, as it oscillated slightly due to some technical reason I can't explain now. After talking with Desmond during the setup and adjustment period, I told him where I thought he could best try to show himself. Desmond appeared to me only once for about 2 seconds in the video. He had very plain symmetrical features and was shown from the waist up. He seemed to be in his mid-30s with dark sunken eyes. He was wearing a bowler hat and a 1940s type jacket with wide rounded lapels with an open shirt that had no collar. Further research with Desmond shows he can see me and some things around me when his energy level is high. For example, I can give him instructions on how to travel somewhere. One time I showed him a map on my Microsoft Streets and Tips and showed him the same roads and satellite photos taken from Google Earth. With this information, I am able to ask him to get a specific place and get information I desire. One time I sent him to the Powerball lottery drawing headquarters located at Urbandale Drive in Urbandale, Iowa, to see if he could see the Powerball numbers being drawn 6 hours before the draw. I have reason to believe he is not bound by time as we know it, and thought he could travel through different threads of time and different timelines. Well, I asked him to go and do this one for me, after about an hour of instruction on what to look for and how to get there. Then, when I asked if he was ready, he said, "I'll try. Then, I'll be right back." He returned in approximately 30 minutes and gave me some numbers. I was all excited and purchased our ticket. Later the next day, I went to check the ticket and realized I had sent him on the wrong day. I explained to Desmond how sorry I was for the mistake and how much time and energy we wasted. I asked him what the numbers were he gave me, because he was there 24 hours too early to see the actual drawing, and realized he must have witnessed one of the practice draws they do to check out the machines. Lately, I've been having some other problems. I injured my back seriously at work, and have not had the desire to record anymore due to my pain and medication. I've been recovering well, and expect my research to continue. My new job doesn't offer me as much travel and time to do the things I'd like. I just hope when I start recording again, Desmond and Joe will let some other people talk to me. I wanted to share my experience with you guys. I'm not sure what it means or anything, but if you do make it to the end of the story, you can decide for yourself and let me know what you think. One night when I was 13, I couldn't sleep, so I tried to turn the other way, on my side, to try to get myself comfy. As I turned around, I saw a figure of a woman against the wall in front of me. She was kind of a black figure, and she seemed to have a hunchback and a hump on her back from the way she was standing. This, of course, freaked me out, especially since I was only 13 at the time. I lay in shock and not knowing what to do, and after like 2 seconds, I put my head under the covers and called for my mom. She came in, and I was really afraid to tell her in case she thought I was crazy, so I just told her that I had a really bad dream. I was definitely not asleep. I couldn't sleep for a few nights as it freaked me out so much. This kind of went away after a few weeks, and I was gradually able to sleep again. However, a few weeks after this had happened, I was getting pains in my back and I went to the doctors to get scans and things. I then found out I had sclerosis, curvature of the spine. I eventually started getting a slight hump in my back because of this. It has been 10 years since I saw this woman, but I can never get it out of my mind. I've since told my mom about this, and she seemed freaked out about it as well. I'm not sure what this means, or if it was a ghost or spirit trying to tell me something. I have no idea, but it really did freak me out. This is just a short experience I had at about 17. A group of 4 friends and I were sitting at my house, bored out of our minds. My buddy Joey, not his real name, was literally banging his head against the wall out of boredom. Tommy, also not his real name, was reading a book he brought. His sister Alexis, of course not her real name either, was teasing my dog with a flashlight. Henry had his earbuds blaring. Finally, my friend Annie was on my laptop looking for something that might be fun. Annie came across a story a few guys had posted on a ghost website about an abandoned local farm. They posted how they went exploring the farm and got the hell scared out of them by a black figure. Annie is into the paranormal and asked if we wanted to investigate it. I said sure, better than sitting around waiting for my dog to bite Alexis for teasing him. The others agreed, so we hopped into my truck. It's a single cab with 3 seats. The girls rode in the cab with me, while Henry, Joey, and Tommy rode in the truck bed. I didn't believe in ghosts. If someone told me they saw a ghost, I would have to say stop watching Scooby-Doo and return to reality. Annie told me how to get there with the directions the guys posted on the ghost site. When we arrived, we all hopped out and walked up to the gate. We hopped the gate and started talking about where to go. We agreed to split up. Tommy and Joey were with Alexis. They went to the old barn, while Annie was with Henry and I. We went into the 2-story farmhouse. I looked in the upstairs window. All the glass looked like it had been smashed out of the windows. The house looked wrecked. It looked like whoever lived there had been a hoarder. While Henry and I were exploring, we heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. We were intrigued, so we took off upstairs. When we got to the 2nd floor, it was empty. While walking down the stairs, I felt like someone had been pushing me. I was mad. My right shoulder was cut thanks to the old wooden steps I had twisted my ankle on. I asked Annie and Henry, "What the hell are you guys trying to do? Are you trying to kill me?" Annie said she and Henry were in the bedroom to the right, looking through some of the old junk when they heard me scream, and they came running. Henry held me up, and we were about to leave when we heard something slam hard in the kitchen. We went in and saw a toolbox we had seen on the table on the floor with various tools around it. Henry said no way in hell that toolbox had a damn padlock on it. We all looked around the lock. It was on the table now, besides where the toolbox used to be. Henry tried to get in the toolbox earlier, but the lock prevented him. We heard footsteps upstairs again. Annie said screw this and ran outside along Henry while I hobbled out. The jerks left me behind. When we were out of the house, we saw Alexis, Tommy, and Joey. They were panting out of breath and looked terrified. We asked what happened. Alexis said that they saw a black figure with red eyes and it charged at them. We all heard a loud snarl like a big dog, and we took off towards my truck on the way there and said, look. In one of the upstairs windows, we saw two glowing eyes go from the middle of the window to the top. Then they separated. One went left and one went right. We all hopped the fence and peeled out of there as fast as everyone could. I am not currently experiencing any hauntings, but I do have a tale of a spiritual encounter. I will begin by prefecting story with the events leading up to the event. My grandfather passed away in hospice care in July 2000. I spent his last night on earth with him, holding his hand and reading the Bible to him, which was his favorite literature. He was an artist and a carpenter, and spent his last remaining years up in his home carving beautiful artwork out of wood. He loved his simple life and carved because he wanted to, never once selling his museum quality work. He would only give it away to anyone who truly appreciated it. At 88, he was about 80% deaf and completely blind in one eye, and nearly blind in the other. After a stroke 6 months earlier, his health declined quickly, and he simply gave up on life. As he lay in the bed, I sang to him, although he probably could not hear me or even knew that I was there, and he was in a coma-like state with his eyes open. He had stopped eating, and he was severely underweight, and it was hard for me to see him like that, knowing how much he loved life and living. Many times he cried in his last few years, saying that he loved his life and didn't want to die. During his last living moments with me, I looked down into his distant, foggy eyes, knowing he couldn't hear or see me, and told him that the baby goose that he held at my house the last time he visited had grown up now and had 4 babies of her own. His eyes filled up with tears and turned red, and his mouth began to quiver as if he was trying to say something. He hadn't spoken in nearly 2 weeks. His love for animals and nature transcended through his limitations that night. I knew he would probably die that night, so I sat next to him with my hand on his chest, feeling his every breath and heartbeat. He didn't pass away until the next day, after I left. He was alone, which is what I didn't want. I didn't want his spirit to leave his body and to look down at an empty room. That bothered me for a long time. In an attempt to comfort ourselves, we turned to his Bible. He was much more dedicated to the word than we were ever, but knowing that it was so close to his heart, we thought it would ease our minds. My mother said to read something that he had underlined or highlighted, which is something his Bible was full of. I read the first thing I opened that was underlined. You do not have to understand the Bible to feel the power behind these words, which read, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Where there, comfort one another with these words." We all felt a chill run through us. At his wake, I waited until everyone left, and I cut a small lock of his beautiful, thick white hair and placed it in an envelope. As myself and my friend walked to the vehicle to leave, I opened the door, and a mourning dove flew into me as if trying to enter the truck with me. It injured its wings, and I brought it home. I rescue and rehabilitate small animals all the time, so I mended its wing and let it go about a week later. I took that as a sign from my grandfather, as we had that bond of loving all creatures great and small. A couple of weeks later, in August, my best friend was at my house, and I was showing her videotapes of Papa, that is what I called him, because she had never met him. I wanted to share with her the kind of person he was. For nearly 2 hours, we watched him talk about God, Leonardo da Vinci, his childhood, his 24 brothers and sisters, his beloved mother, and we saw him play his guitar and sing old, sad songs about homeless children and hobos, songs that made grown men cry, including himself. After the tape was finished, I got up to go to the kitchen for something to drink, and my friend went to the restroom. At that moment, we both heard a loud musical tone that sounded like a doorbell. Since I do not have a doorbell, we both said, "What the heck is that?" We both re-entered the living room where we had been watching the tape and searched everywhere where the sound had come from. My heart sank as I realized what it was. About 2 years earlier, I had one of those cheap doorbells that you plug into the wall, using a battery-operated button at your front door to operate the sound. I became so irritated by all the neighborhood kids ringing it that I just took the button off and put it in my piano stool. The battery had gone bad anyway. I never unplugged the part that rings. I'd forgotten it was there because it was hidden behind a chair. That was eerie enough, but what really got me thinking was when I explained to my friend that I had the ringer set to only ring one long tone. To change it to the traditional two-tone ding-dong, you had to take the back off of the unit and set the switches according to the manual. Needless to say, it did ring in the ding-dong fashion. Oddly enough, it was my friend who said, "Maybe it was your grandfather saying hi." It hadn't even occurred to me. Shortly after that, I was explaining what happened to my mother on the phone, and it happened again. She could hear it, and we both fell silent. He was letting me know that his fears of leaving his family behind were pointless, and that he was with the rest of his family in heaven. I believe he was thanking me for being there for him when no one else could. It has been 3 years since his own death, and the doorbell has not rang since. Hey, my name is Maddie. Today, me and my best friend Summer had a strange encounter with a malevolent spirit. Let me explain what happened. A few months ago, me and one of my other friends, Alicia, met an 8-year-old spirit named Reese through a Ouija board. She seemed like a very sweet and innocent girl. She told us at her own will, and I repeat her own will, how she met her death. She apparently got beaten to death by her abusive father. Then a few weeks went by, and I introduced Reese to my now best friend Summer. They got along very well. It didn't seem like she had any sorts of problem with her or anyone she met. The next day we were playing when we got a call from my friend Amy. Long story short, she had an encounter with a spirit named Sarah. She claimed that Sarah was a very stubborn spirit. It took her hours just to get her to say goodbye. Amy also stated that Sarah seemed like a very lonely and clingy spirit who did not want to let her go. Then we made an attempt to contact Sarah through the board. It was a success. After we talked to Sarah for a bit, we asked her if she knew Reese. Sarah suddenly stopped moving the planchette. We asked her if she was alright. She answered no. She also said that Reese isn't Reese. She said that Reese is actually a man named Roger. Sarah also told us that Roger was the one who killed her at the age of 27. The final thing she said about Roger was that if we ever told him that she was the one who told, that he would send her straight to the gates of hell. We tried to contact Reese, Roger, on December 10th, 2016, around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We successfully contacted Reese. At that period of time, he didn't know that we knew who he really was. Then, we did something that we both regret. We asked if she was hiding anything from us. He responded this in his own words. "Fine, you fucking caught me." Then right after that he said, "Who told you two idiots?" We simply responded to the internet in hopes to keep Sarah safe. Then Roger responded by saying, "You are a liar." Then the planchette started to circle around the alphabet counterclockwise, excluding the letter M. It did not touch the corners whatsoever. Summer and I started to panic, wondering what it was trying to do. I thought he simply lost control over the planchette, but Summer thought it was something more, because at that time, it was spinning around continuously for about 30 seconds. So I suggested that if we put pressure on it, it might stop it. It just kept going even with pressure, but just slower. But after we lifted the pressure, it continued to spin and got even faster. After a while, it just randomly landed on goodbye. Maybe it just got tired or got sick of us panicking. I really need to know your thoughts on this, and if this occurrence was really legitimately something evil, because I don't know what to explain it for. Thank you for reading. I didn't believe in the Ouija board because they sell them at Toys R Us, so I didn't think they would sell something dangerous to kids and adults. I've read stories about the Ouija board, but I don't know if it's true. People do make up stories, so it's hard to tell if it's true or not. Some people say the Ouija board is just a game. Others say it's not just a game, and some say it's dangerous. I had to find out for myself if the Ouija board is really dangerous. On Sunday, I decided to go to Toys R Us to buy the board. I drove my car in the morning to Toys R Us, and I was just looking around at first for about an hour. After looking around, I went to the game section and I purchased the Ouija board. I drove back to my apartment and put the board in the closet. The same day, about 10 p.m., I decided to try it out. I took it out of the box and put it on my bed. I didn't have any candles, so I just dimmed the light. I put the board on my lap and the planchette on the board. I put my fingers on the planchette and I started to round in circles for about a minute. I stopped and I started saying, "Is anybody out there?" I kept saying it for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then, all of a sudden, I felt a strange presence right above me. I was so scared that I ran out of my room, and I threw the board in the garbage. I was very shaken. I went back to my room and turned the lights on, and I didn't sleep at all. And that's why I don't mess with Ouija boards. I have had several experiences, but I will tell you two of my most frightening. A friend and I had started playing with the Ouija board, and it ended up turning our lives upside down for the span of around 2 years. One night, my friend Judy, her husband Luke, Loma, and myself were watching a movie called Witchboard right in the middle of a winter storm. All footprints had been covered at this time, and the streets were empty. About halfway through the movie, the front door blew open, and we heard running footsteps come into the house, up the stairs, down the hall, and into the bedroom where Judy's 2-year-old lay sleeping. We were all just sitting there frozen in shock and fright when we heard a loud slam, which turned out to be the bedroom door, and the poor little boy started screaming, "Monster, monster." Luke took off up the stairs, only to find a very upset little boy, and nothing or no one else. As things started to calm down, Judy and I went to shut the front door, and there were still no footprints in the snow. The only snow that had come into the house was blowing from the wind. It was around March now, and one day, as I laid down for a nap, I felt the bed start to shake under me. I was uncertain if I had really felt what I thought I had, so I was not frightened, but I got up anyway. That was only the beginning. Not long after that, it became a constant thing every time I tried to lay in my bed. The shaking started to get more violent, and it also felt as if someone was punching up at the mattress from beneath. I complained several times, and no one believed me. It was now to the point where I was afraid to go to bed. I began sleeping at my friend Loma's house because her bed didn't shake. After staying at her house for 2 weeks, my mom said it was time to come home, and I did agree, but not until she promised to spend the first night sleeping in bed with me. That night, we had only been in bed for about 10 minutes before the bed started its usual shaking. It was very minor at first.
So my mom started to make excuses for why it was happening. By the time 5 minutes had passed, it was now undeniable, and I could tell my mother was getting scared, but was trying to stay calm for my sake. The last straw for my mother was when the punching started. It was harder than I had ever felt before. We laid there for a moment while my mother mustered up the courage to peek under the bed. Of course, she didn't find anything, and we promptly left the room and set ourselves up in the living room for the remainder of the night. My bed continued to shake and punch for some time thereafter, but it eventually quit. However, once in a while it will start, to this day, and I just get up or ignore it, and it stops. This encounter involved a Ouija board, and possibly my guardian angel. Years ago, a friend and I were goofing around with a Ouija board. Being a bit ignorant of the unknown, I mistakenly asked it how old I would be when I died and how. It replied that I would be 16 and that I would die in a car accident. A month or two after I turned 16, I was asked if I wanted to go out with my parents the next day to run errands. I said yes. That next morning, I woke up to discover that my parents left without me. I was annoyed. An hour after I woke up, my mother called me from the hospital. They had been hit by a transport truck an hour before. When I asked why they had left without me, my mom replied that her and my dad had tried for a half hour to get me up, and then they gave up. What makes it so scary is where the truck had hit. My one brother has to sit behind my mom, and my dad does not wear a seatbelt. Had I been in that car, I would have been sitting behind my dad with the seatbelt on. The transport truck hit the car on the driver's side, almost imploding on the driver's and left backseat side. That's where I would have been sitting. Guardian angel? I think so. I was celebrating Halloween around my best mate Felicity's house. We usually have a laugh and a joke, but neither of us had played with a Ouija board before, so we gathered about 7 friends from the neighborhood. First, we lit candles, 1 black, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 clear. Fliss had purchased the board from an old shop in the Stoke Town Center. We sat down in her dining room and placed the board right in the middle of the dining room table. We all placed our fingers on the gold planchet. I was the reader, so I asked the questions. At first, we did not get any response, so we all giggled and made fun of the silly people who got themselves worked up about these silly boards. About 5 seconds after we stopped giggling, we heard a massive bang on the floor. I thought it was one of the boys playing a trick, so I suggested that we all sit legs crossed on the chairs. I made sure we were all cross-legged, and I said, "If it was a ghost that made the bang on the floor, can you please do it again?" And it did. I spoke again. We will now try to communicate using the board. So we started to use the board again, and I again asked if anybody was present who wanted to communicate with us. The planchet moved to yes. I asked for a name, and it replied, "I am unclean." Fliss's uncle had passed on, so I inquired if we were talking with her uncle Ian. The response was no. Again, the planchet moved to the following letters, "I am unclean." We had made contact with an apparent demon. We decided to say sorry for disturbing, and we thanked the spirit for its presence. However, it did not go. The spirit of demon flung Fliss back into the wall. Then it came for me. I had a vision of hell itself at that moment, and I remain grateful to this day that it did not hurt me.
In telling the story, let me assure the reader that it was passed to me by my grandmother, Eileen. Eileen is in failing health, but her memory is untouched, and her ability to spin a tale is uncanny. This particular story is about her father, Joe, his first wife, and a house that will never be forgotten. My grandmother is a devout Christian, but she believes these tales of the unexplained to be completely true. Judge for yourself. In the late 1800s to early 1900s, It was common practice in the coal fields of Kentucky and West Virginia for a miner to spend the majority of the week at the mines while leaving his wife at home alone. This is exactly what Joe, my great-grandfather, did during his first marriage. After a hasty marriage, Joe bought a small, quaint home for himself and his new wife, Sue. Sue quickly alerted her husband to a potential problem. The house was directly across the road from the local cemetery. Joe, being a firm disbeliever in such superstitious nonsense like ghosts and spooks, had a good laugh when Sue begged him not to make her stay alone in a house so close to a graveyard and told her to get used to it. When Monday morning arrived, he left her alone and laughed as she sobbed on the porch. That night, after completing her tours, she settled down in the bed for a good night's rest and doused the lamps. As soon as she had climbed into bed, a strange noise became apparent outside. As she pulled the covers up around her head, she could hear something like barrels rolling or horses galloping around the house. She tried to sleep and eventually, as the sunrise drove the mysterious sounds away, found some comforting slumber. Every night, the noises started getting louder and louder, seeming to get closer to the house, and, on Friday night, Sue heard 3 knocks on the door. In a terrified fit, she screamed, "Leave me alone," and suddenly, the noises faded. The next morning brought Joe's return, and the first thing Sue did was beg him to let her leave the house, telling him of the haunted noises. He laughed unsympathetically and told her to get over this stupidity. In desperation, she bitterly screamed, "Joe, I hope to God it gets you." Joe wasn't the least bit frightened and told her that it was Cheryl's local men playing tricks on her. Later that night, Sue slept well in Joe's arms, but some subtle suspicion began to eat at the unbeliever. As he drifted into a shallow sleep, he was startled at a loud crack coming from the fireplace that startled him, and as he sat upright in the bed, he saw the apparition of an elderly woman staring at him from the rocking chair at the foot of the bed. My grandmother says that Joe knew exactly who the woman was, but he took the knowledge of her identity to his grave because simply, she had been dead for 6 months before they moved into the house. Joe shuddered with fear and her bony, cold hand stretched to clutch his ankles as she latched onto his foot and began pulling him towards her and the footboard of the bed. Joe fainted with fright as he felt his foot slide down to the foot of the bed in the dead hand of the spirit. The next morning, Sue roused her pale husband and sat up in the bed as he opened his eyes and screamed with terror. The footbed of the bed was broken and the rocking chair had been toppled during the night. Joe immediately promised his frightened wife that not another night would be passed in this restless house, simply telling her, "Sue, whatever it was, it got me." Thank you for reading my grandmother's story. I hope you found it entertaining because, well, I thought it was pretty frightening. See you later. I have told this story to people who are not there to witness the actual event, and some look at me as if I am just telling a story to get a good laugh, but I find nothing funny about it. Everything I'm about to relate is true, and I guess in some bizarre way, I feel that by retelling this story to anyone who is willing to listen to it will bring me some comfort. On July 6, 1990, a high school friend shot himself in the head with a rifle in a nearby local baseball dugout. The act shocked and saddened everyone, especially his parents, of course, who did not want to believe their only son would take his own life. The days that followed his death were happening, for me, as if in a dream. Fearing this act would spark some sort of chain reaction, school's counselors were sent in to help the students grieve and discuss their feelings of loss. Days went by, and there seemed to be a cloud of despair and confusion hanging over our entire high school class. If he had lived, my friend would have graduated from high school with the rest of us that same year. When he died, he was 2 months away from his 18th birthday. About a week after his suicide, I was visiting my best friend at the time, we'll call her Anne, in her home. We were both still very affected by the death of our friend, and we began to talk late into the night about his possible reasons for taking his own life and how crazy and unexpected it was. We had been discussing the whole chain of events and basically trying to make sense of something we couldn't even imagine when I suddenly became very uncomfortable talking about our deceased friend. I was sitting at the time in a desk chair across from Anne, who was sitting comfortably on her bed facing me. She was looking directly at me, and she could see the discomfort on my face. She assumed I was just overreacting, and our discussion had gotten to me, so she stood up and moved towards the door of her bedroom and gestured in a sweeping motion with her arm for me to follow her into the kitchen down the hall. There was a single small desk light on behind me when she made this motion with her arm, so that when she moved, her body created a shadow on the wall. This is going to sound ridiculous, and I'm no physics expert, but when Anne swept her arm up into the air, gesturing me to follow her, her shadow did not follow her arm. Instead, there was a strange kind of delay, and I saw her arm move, and about 5 to 10 seconds later, the shadow of an arm moved, mimicking the same gesture she had just made. I, of course, thought my eyes were playing tricks on me and ignored the shadow, and I would have kept it to myself if only Anne had not turned to me and asked, "Did you just see that?" I answered yes, of course, and we fled out of the room and into the kitchen. Anne's house was large, and our frightened voices bounced off the columned walls, but nothing ever occurred after that. My friend Anne and I no longer speak, and I'm sure that if she knew I was relaying this story to strangers, she would think I was crazy, but I remember the death of her high school friend as if it were yesterday, and I can't help wishing that the shadow we saw was indeed a sign from our friend, but I will never be too sure. I write this story in his memory, and in the hope that he is in a place where his problems have been all taken away. Thanks for reading. This story I'm about to tell you has been talked about in my family for years. Now it has been passed down to my own daughter, who tells it to her friends at slumber parties. It begins with the first time I ever saw anything, when I was around the age of 7. It happened in a house that we lived in years ago in western New York. I shared a room with my sister. We both had the feeling something was always watching us, but being so young, we never really worried all that much about it, until one night, while I was trying to sleep. My bed was up against one wall, and my sister's bed faced the other. I turned, so I was facing the wall. When I opened my eyes, after getting that feeling of being watched again, there, standing in the wall, was a woman. She was a young woman, dressed all in black, high white lace collar, wearing a cameo, and hair pulled up neatly in a bun. She stood there with her hands folded in front of her, smiling sweetly at me. Now mind you, I was 7 years old, so I pulled the covers up over my head and then down again to take a peek just to see if she was still there, which she was, and this time with a bigger smile. I got so scared I jumped from my bed and ran across the room to my sister's bed. I landed right on top of her, waking her up, of course. I told her there was a lady in my wall, but when we looked again, the woman was gone. The next day I told my mom about it. She said it must have been just my guardian angel and left it at that. She refused to talk about it any further, or even years later. Then recently, my brother and I got to talking about that house. He said, "Don't you remember what the neighborhood kids used to say about our house?" And of course, I didn't remember a thing. He told me that apparently a couple had died there years ago. Then he asked me if I remembered the time that he and I were in the backyard and we saw the old man in the attic window. And all of a sudden it rushed back. Bam. Right when he told me about the old man in the attic window, I had a major flashback and remembered it like it was yesterday. I don't even have to tell you, even after all these years, it scared me. Well, many years have passed since we lived there, but I still have dreams about that house, and I wish the dreams would stop. I have many other scary stories to tell, but I've freaked myself out telling this one, so the others will have to wait. This incident happened about 2 years ago. I was 17 at the time, working at a restaurant motel in Old Saybrook, Connecticut called The Castle. The scariest thing about this place, besides the low pay, was the old story of what happened to one of its original owners. From almost my first day working there, I was told that one of the members of the family who built the house had killed himself on the grounds. The story was that one night, the son had discovered that his fiancée was cheating on him with one of his close friends. Deep in depression, the son climbed to the tallest tower of the castle, tied a rope to some type of pole on the roof, and hanged himself. The next morning, as the parents were leaving the home, they saw him hanging. They immediately sold the mansion, and it has been a hotel ever since. Many employees said that they had heard and seen things, yet I, as most people believe at first, didn't believe the stories. That is, until one night, I was working a late shift with a friend of mine named Katie. We were cleaning up the dining room after closing when we heard the kitchen door slam shut. I had popped them open, but as the wind off Long Island Sound is pretty strong, I figured they had been blown shut. Katie yelled at me to get over there and look at the kitchen. When I arrived, I saw a weird green light pouring through the round window of the door and flooding out the crack at the bottom. Still unconvinced of any supernatural going-ons, I tried to open the door, but it was not happening. I thought someone was in there, and I knew if the place got trashed, I would get fired, so I reared back and tried to put my shoulder through the door. At the time, I was about 6'2", 200 pounds, played football and lifted a lot of weights. The door should have popped right open, but not this time. Katie and I peered into the window, and there, plain as day, was a man dressed in antique clothes with a noose around his neck looking right back at us. He walked by and the green light left us. We instantly figured, forget the boss, it's quitting time. We ran outside and could barely light our cigarettes. Our hands were shaking so badly. From then on, I was a believer, and I knew I would never, ever doubt ghosts ever again. My aunt and uncle had a passion for restoring old country houses, the last of which had been at an end at the turn of the century. The house sits on 50 acres at the top of a hill, next to a historic old church with an equally historic old graveyard. I can't claim to recall for certain, but I think the church was used as a field hospital during the Civil War. My uncle would tell us the stories about the months after they moved into the house. Their bedroom was on the second of 3 floors, near the large, almost spiral staircase that emptied into the foyer to 2 sitting areas. Late in the evening, while they were in bed, my aunt and uncle would hear what sounded like a distant crowd of people in conversation. Living in quiet country houses most of their lives made them fairly light sleepers. The local volunteer fire department changed that over time. I'll get to that. My uncle would get up to check out the noise and find nothing, but since it was an old house with a boiler, and that it was more or less near town, there were many possible rational explanations for the noise. Still, over the course of a few months, the noises grew louder and louder until it sounded like a party was being thrown in their own house, and my aunt and uncle weren't invited. This had grown so gradually that my uncle was much more annoyed than fearful. One night, he went to the stairs and shouted for them to shut up so we can get some sleep. That seemed to scale back the noise enough to satisfy him, although it didn't go away completely. The next weekend, he took a walk for the first time through the local graveyard and noticed many of the stones were overturned and some of the plots were neglected. He righted the headstones and cleaned up some of the plots that weekend and never again heard the noises in the house. My uncle passed away in that house 1 year ago this October. Subsequently, I spent a great deal more time there last winter than I had before taking care of a few things for my aunt. I slept on the top floor across from the game room. Many nights an air raid siren would go off, summoning the local volunteer firefighters to the station house. I never did get used to sleeping through that. Then one night, the siren wailed at about 2 a.m., and I was having a hard time going back to sleep. I was wide awake when I heard something. It lasted only an instant and seemed to me to be a crowd in the distance that had just been told the punchline to a very funny joke. Whatever it was, it reminded me of one of my uncle's stories. As an epilogue, I should mention that my aunt is trying to sell the house. So far, the most likely buyer is the local funeral home. While sitting around looking at photo albums with my grandmother, we came across some newspaper clippings. The clippings were from a newspaper in Indiana. They were about an old brick house being torn down. Since we live in Mississippi, I found it strange that my grandmother would have these clippings, so I questioned her about them. She then told me one of the eeriest stories I have ever heard. In 1946, my grandmother lived in Mobile, Indiana, with her husband and their child. They lived in an old brick house that was built before the Civil War and stood on the outskirts of town. It was a large house with very high ceilings and wooden floors. In the master bedroom was a closet with a heavy wooden door that did not have a knob, only a wooden latch to keep the door closed. My grandmother would shut and latch the closet. When she would leave the room and return, the closet door would be standing wide open. She would shut the door again and go about her chores. When she returned, the door would be open. She did this several times a day. She said the door stayed open more than she could keep it closed. She was more annoyed than scared by this strange event. About 8 months later, she and her husband divorced and she moved to Mississippi with my grandfather. The house she had lived in did not cross her mind until 10 years later when her Aunt Bonnie wrote her a letter and sent her the newspaper clippings. The clippings talked about her old house and reported that it had been torn down. While they were tearing down the house, a hole was discovered under the closet floor. They had found the remains of a man in the hole. It was believed to be the body of a soldier from the Civil War. After lurking around here for ages reading everyone else's story, I finally got up the nerve to post one of my own. My story isn't as dramatic or interesting as some of the other stories posted here, but I feel confident enough to post it because 3 other people have had experience in this particular house, so here it goes. This happened a few months ago while I was visiting a friend's house one evening. I'll refer to my friend as G. A mutual friend of ours, J, was also present. This was my first and only visit to the house, and no one else was home at the time apart from the 3 of us. The house in question is an old wood villa, which would be, at a guess, 80 to 100 years old. It's a rather large one-level structure with 2 long and connected hallways, one that leads from the front door to the back of the house and another that spans across the back of the house. Together, the hallways form the shape of a T. While eating dinner in the kitchen, dining room area located in the back portion of the house, something drew my attention to the right, so I glanced down to the top section of the hallway. As I watched, a dark shadow moved across very quickly from right to left, as though it just moved up the other long hall, through the center of the house, then straight ahead crossing the top hallway. I didn't say anything at the time, although I was curious about what I had seen. I have to say that while I definitely believe in ghosts, I didn't want to get too excited about something which could have a very logical explanation for. After dinner, G invited us on a tour of the house, and while exploring the rooms off the back hallway, I carefully checked to see if there were any windows that could have let car headlights in to cause the shadow I'd seen, but I couldn't find anything to explain it. Sometime later, G left the lounge to make coffee and, while she was out of the room, I whispered to J that I had seen a shadow cross the back hall. She surprised me by telling me that she too had seen a ghost moving from right to left in the same exact place, only she's seen it twice before in broad daylight. We were intrigued and quite excited about this, but didn't say anything to G as we didn't want to frighten her. Interestingly enough, G approached J recently to ask her opinion about ghosts because a young woman who also lives in the house claimed to see a shadow move up the hallway. She was concerned because she too would be spending several weeks alone there, and understandably, she was frightened. G explained that while she hadn't seen anything herself, there was one occasion when she was walking up the hallway and she felt like she accidentally pushed someone out of the way, even though she couldn't see anyone there. I've been in various places before where I've been able to sense unseen presences. I've had one experience where I used to get a feeling of overwhelming fear every time I went into one particular room in a house my parents owned. With the shadow that Jay and I saw, we didn't feel any strong feelings or emotions connected with it. At this moment in time, I haven't heard any more events in that house. When I was about 12 years old, my brother, sister, and I moved into my grandparents' house. Ever since we could remember, we heard stories about the house being haunted. Nothing too big, but strange things happened a lot. Rumor had it that there used to be a horse track room stable where my grandparents built their house, and a little boy had been trampled in there. We have never actually checked into this story, but it is what we heard. At least it is what we were told. Anyway, all of us grandkids were petrified of going upstairs. It was always so cold up there and just freaky, but that was where all the bedrooms were, so when we moved in, we had no choice. Actually, I had no choice. My little brother and sister had beds set up downstairs and I slept upstairs. When I was about 4, I had taken up smoking cigarettes, but no one knew about it. I used to turn off my bedroom light and smoke cigarettes. I turned off my light just in case my grandparents happened to come up the stairs. They always turned on the hall light to help their way up the stairs. This way, I would know how to put out my cigarette and spray air freshener. One night, I was upstairs alone smoking when I heard someone coming up the stairs. It was late and everyone had been in bed. The hallway light never came on, but all the same time, I butted out my cigarette and waited, but no one ever came up. This happened quite a few times, and I just got used to it. This house is about 50 or 60 years old. The doors are the old latch type and made of nothing but wood. They are solid. To close the door, you have to lift the hook and latch it onto the other part of the door. To open the door, you have to lift the handle and pull the door open. On my bedroom door, I also had an eye hook lock to keep my room locked and my little brother out. I would be laying in bed at night watching TV and my bedroom door would just pop open, but it would never open all the way because of the lock on my door. I never thought anything of it. I just thought it was a breeze until my brother and I started sharing stories about what was happening in that room in the house. I've since moved out and my brother moved into my old room. We have all grown up and started sleeping upstairs, and we have gotten over our fears pretty much. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs and they were set up weird. The house was square, 2 bedrooms on each side of the house with a staircase up the middle. To get to the 2 rooms, you have to walk through the main 2 ones. When my little sister finally decided to move upstairs, she moved into the room behind mine. She swears to hearing a little boy crying in her room at night. Recently I bought a Ouija board and have been using it at my new house. One night my cousin, brother, sister, and boyfriend were using it when my cousin and I started talking about how we used to use the board when we were younger at my grandparents' house. My cousin remembers talking to a little boy who died at this location, and she remembers the little boy telling us his vision of the story of what happened to him. He told us his name was Brandon, and his father beat him in the tack room, and that unlike the story being passed around, he hadn't been trampled at all. Which story is true, I don't know, and I guess we'll never know. My little brother is the only one of us left living with my grandparents, and he is now living in my old bedroom. He has heard the footsteps coming up the stairs when he was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. He has heard whimpering, and he has talked to this little boy. Not literally talking, but questions will pop into his head that he already knows the answers to, like, what year is it? And he will answer out loud. He will not even be thinking about a certain thing, and then all of a sudden, he'll have a question. The door pops open on him, but he doesn't have the latch, so it pops open and closes again. Now, here's the last we have heard from the spirits in our grandparents' house. He was sitting in his room talking to his girlfriend on the phone when he heard someone coming up the stairs. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. He hung up with his girlfriend and went into the hallway, but nobody was there. Now, what happens next makes us believe that the little boy was beaten to death and not trampled as everyone had been told. The footsteps were heavy ones, definitely not of those of a child. When my brother realized no one was there, he just assumed that it was the father because of the heavy footsteps. He told the father that if he didn't leave Brandon, the little boy, alone, that he was going to kill himself and haunt his butt down. He would then beat him to a fine pulp, then come back to life, yeah right, dig up his grave and burn his mangy hide. My brother has become attached to Brandon and has not heard anything from him about his father or heard his father around the house.
Hey guys, it's PhantomOfDarkness here, and if you would like to subscribe to my channel, I'd really encourage you guys to do that. We make a lot of great ghost stories, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please leave a thumbs up, a like, and share it, because I'm a small YouTuber, and the algorithm will like me if you comment and say good things about this video. So I appreciate it, guys, and I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.